This is session 2 of week 2, Introduction to Graduate Research for Asian Christian University of the Philippines. My name is Philip Gray. I'm delighted to continue this Introduction to Graduate Research for you students. Again, I apologize for the delay in getting these videos posted, but we've had some unforeseen circumstances that have prevented me doing that in a timely fashion. I'll try to get those done as quickly as possible. Last time we discussed the different types of programs of learning, such as the liberal arts college versus the Bible college versus the technical school versus the preacher school versus seminaries, and we talked about how those names imply different philosophies, different methodologies, different emphases, and that there may be good to come from most of those different kinds of methods of study. Depends on one's station in life, one's needs also, and one's opportunity. I didn't say a whole lot about the program of study of which I was a part at Friedharben University in the 1970s. I could just simply point out, I guess you're very familiar with this because you've done something like it already to get to the point where you are. I began studies there, and I remember having some Bible classes, such as the Life of Christ, and then later on Christian Evidences. And so each semester I would have maybe 1 or 2 Bible classes, and the rest of my courses, 4 or 5 more courses that were offered for each semester, would be something like English composition, or literature, or biology, or world history, or studies of civilization, things of that nature. I meant to say something about that in the previous session, so I'll point that out now and remind you that that was the kind of program I did versus a preacher school. I've never attended a preacher school where the emphasis is generally on study of the Bible throughout the entire program, with little else being brought in a formal kind of way. This time I'm going to talk about problems with accreditation. I'm going to talk about the problem of not having accreditation, and then the next session I'll talk about the problem of having accreditation. Now, I'm not familiar with your system enough to know the accrediting bodies that would be relevant to this school, to Asian Christian University. I have received correspondences from our brother Demar Elam and our brother Daniel and others concerning this matter. In the past, it's been a year or two, I think, since I have seen any note on that subject in which they might have mentioned what your governing body is, what your accreditation authority is for your school. But I know that you have one. I know that there are standards you have to meet, even though these may not be set up in quite the same way. Well, what do we mean by accreditation? You know, when you accredit someone, you confirm the legitimacy of someone or something or some organization or program. And that's what we have in mind here. We're saying a school is seen to be legitimate in the minds of those who have a concern about such questions if it is able to meet certain standards. So in order to know if it meets those standards, let me give you a simple example. I have here from an earlier period here in this country a statement to the effect that in order to earn a bachelor's degree, which is the undergraduate degree here, a student must complete a minimum of 192 quarter hours with a cumulative grade point average of 2.0 on all hours undertaken at, and then it mentions the name of the college, whose catalog I have just been perusing. Well, that's pretty well standard. Say about 192 quarter hours would be expected in order for you to get the BA degree or the BS degree. Well, now here's a situation that might arise. It is possible that someone decides he wants to begin a new school, a new college, and he goes out and solicits funds from donors and maybe even receives some funds from government agencies. That is a possibility in this country. And as he does so, he buys a campus, he hires professors, he builds a library and provides books and materials for the library, and sets up an administration to run that school, to have a school. And it's going to put out products that should be competitive with products that are put out by competitive schools, other colleges. But the question is, are these other schools competitive? Is his school competitive? Is it at the same academic level, or is it only at the same academic level in name alone? In name alone. He might say that after, say, maybe 6 months of study, my students are so well educated, I'm going to confer upon them the title of Bachelor of Arts degree. After 6 months of study, why, they've only been able to complete 30 semester hours, but those are intensive semester hours, he could say. These are very hard, rigorous hours. And in comparison to the 192 standard hours that you would get out, say, in a state university, my private college is on the same level, if not superior to. And those who receive their degree after just 30 hours are just as well educated, he could argue, he could allege, as their counterparts who had to spend 192 quarter hours in order to receive their bachelor's degree. Well, now, you immediately recognize that is a suspicious situation. And you might raise an eyebrow about that and wonder, is your school really that good? If you cut corners here and there and you've made it easier for your students to matriculate, to enter your program, to pay you some tuition, and then to get out quicker and go into the work world with a degree in hand, with a diploma in hand, and say, hey, I finished college already. If you think you can do that, you have to have some way to establish that it is legitimate, that you really accomplished what you claim to have accomplished, and very few would believe that you could. The average student is just not going to be as educated if he's only spent, say, 30 hours in studies of even the same program of study as his counterpart who spent a total of 192 hours. It's just obvious on the face of it. Something has to be done to make sure that there is not subterfuge or deceit in academia. Well, we're talking about human beings, and we're showing how this sometimes may occur. In this country, we have an expression. We sometimes call a college like that a degree mill. A degree mill. It isn't considered to be a legitimate school, but it's a place where students can go, put down their money, go through the motions of studying some things, and then very quickly be given a title, to be given a degree, to go out into the world to claim to have that degree. And basically the emphasis is on getting the money for the school. It's a money-making organization, and it doesn't seem to have high aspirations for the students. It's just trying to rake in all the money it can. So it's illegitimate. Well, how do you separate between good schools and bad schools? You may not know of the program that's offered from a brother. Suppose that you are an administrator in a school, and some of you may become teachers and administrators, maybe at Asian Christian University, maybe at other schools that you're able to help establish and be a part of in the future. You're going to hire a teacher, for example, and he comes from an institution, a university in another part of your country or from another country. But let's just say another part of your own country. And you're not very familiar with that school. Maybe you've never even heard the name. You want to know, is that school accredited? In other words, has that school met certain academic requirements? Has it lived up to certain standards and expectations that any school would? Let's just suppose he comes to you and he says, I have a bachelor's degree in biblical studies, and I want to be able to teach at the undergraduate level here. Maybe he can do that in your setting. And you wonder, well, how many hours did you spend to get that bachelor's degree? Well, it only took me 75 hours, and we finished the entire program in 75 hours. 75 hours? How could that be? When it cost us 192 hours. At least 4 years of study. How did you do that in maybe a year or less to get the same learning? The same academic preparation? It just goes without saying there has to be some way to compare and even contrast different institutions to see if a master's degree or a bachelor's degree or a doctor's degree, for example, from one institution is really the same degree at the same level as a similarly sounding degree from another institution. So over the years, a certain protocol has developed in the academic world, at least in my culture, and I'm sure this is true also in your own land. And this is what we would call accrediting agencies, accrediting authorities. I mentioned in the previous setting here in this region of the United States, the predominantly pervasive, or the most important academic accrediting agency of which I'm familiar for most schools would be the As these inspectors go out, they look at the program. They want to know what courses are offered. They want to have some description of those courses to see if that course that bears a certain title is the same kind of course as the one being taught in another school that has used that name, that course title, for many years. Is it really the same course or the same kind of course? Is it really comparable? Can you really compare? Legitimately, truly compare. And these accrediting authorities then will often have the school that's seeking accreditation to seek to be ratified by or to confirm by or given approval by or approval of these accrediting authorities. They will submit information to those authorities to tell how their programs work, what their students are doing, and to give an idea of how many volumes are in their library, how many scholarly journals enter into their library on a regular basis, and things of that nature. They just have to be able to measure. They have to be able to see if a school lives up to the reputation, if it truly is deserving of accreditation. So there are accrediting authorities. As I mentioned, this one, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, is very important. And I have known of cases here where even local high schools or secondary schools in my nation have lost accreditation. They have had maybe turmoil within those schools. Some of them have been found to be cheating on tests, teaching their students how to pass certain kinds of achievement tests and to cut corners to do that. In other words, for them not to be honest in taking those tests. In order to make all of their test scores look good, on the average to have high test scores in comparison to other schools, it has been learned that to do that, they've had to practice deceit, lying and deception. And those are not honorable things in any field, particularly in academia. So some of them have lost their accreditation. They've lost it for different reasons also, if their programs don't measure up. And they have to work to gain back that accreditation. Well, that concept is, a logical, practical concept to have an accrediting authority in one's country. Years ago, when our brethren began starting liberal arts colleges, they did so in the hopes of training young people from Christian homes and even outside of Christian homes, those who were from the world who wanted to enter into these programs to learn about the Bible and to learn about other subjects from a Christian point of view. Hopefully the teachers would be sound and would teach all subject matter from a Christian point of view. So they would begin these schools. Let me give one with which I'm familiar, an example, and that is Montgomery Bible College from Montgomery, Alabama, which later was known as Alabama Christian College. Alabama Christian College. The late Rex A. Turner Sr. and some others were responsible for the beginning of that school. Well, in the late 1960s or the mid-1960s, as I recall, I'm not sure of the exact time period, but somewhere in the decade of the 60s, as I remember, this school was a 2-year program of study. Technically, that would be called a junior college in the United States, a junior college, and it would offer the Associate of Arts degree, the AA degree, which reflects 2 years of study rather than 4 years of study that I mentioned in the opening when I gave the example of 192 quarter hours being necessary to get the bachelor's degree in many schools, or something roughly similar. And they were giving the Associate of Arts degree. Well, this was good. They would learn science and history and math and things like that, and also Bible. There were various Bible classes. And many gospel preachers were able to leave these programs well prepared and able to gather more information on their own as they went out into the world to study, to continue to prepare for ministry, because, of course, preparation is lifelong, students. It's lifelong. It never ends, not upon graduation. That's just the beginning of continued studies the rest of your life. We never quit studying while we're alive in this world, not if we're good students of the Word of God. But it so happened at Alabama Christian School of Religion that there were some men who were graduating with their 2-year degrees, their AA degrees, their associate degrees in biblical studies. Their major study would be Bible. They felt like they needed more information than they could glean in just 2 years of study. Because unlike the preacher school in this country, which normally is made up of 2 years of study, which would be 2 years of more intensive study, almost always of the Bible alone as the subject matter, they would study a number of different things. So they realized that their time in Bible classes was limited at the 2-year level. And so they requested that Alabama Christian College provide an additional year or an additional 2 years of study so that they could earn a bachelor's degree. Well, this was all fine and good. The problem was early on at that particular time, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, which views and inspects these programs, had not authorized Alabama Christian College to provide more than a 2-year program of study. It was recognized even by the state of Alabama. And in this country, the state generally is also involved. A state such as Alabama or Georgia, for example, would be involved in giving permission to an institution, an academic institution, to open up. And I imagine, though I don't know for sure, that there is some similarity in the Philippines as well, that perhaps the government in some measure has to be approached about this and give its approval for an institution to exist and to be recognized as a legitimate institution with the right to confer degrees. So it was said, no, you can't offer 4 years of study because your 2-year program of study is only accredited for 2 years. So if you give men 2 more years, they will be studying at an unaccredited level because we haven't had time to inspect and to study carefully what the other 2 years of study would consist of, so we're not yet going to give accreditation for those studies. Later on they did. This was down the road, but we're talking about the earliest days. Because of that, the school, by the way, this is just an incidental aside, it may be interesting to you, Alabama Christian College formed on campus another entity known as Alabama Christian School of Religion. Alabama Christian School of Religion. And the School of Religion met at I think many of the classes met in the church building of the Campus Church of Christ, which had a piece of property that was adjacent to the campus of Alabama Christian College there in Montgomery. So they were able to continue their studies at Alabama Christian College, but without accreditation. Eventually accreditation, of course, was desired, but Alabama Christian School of Religion became a separate program, actually with a separate organization from Alabama Christian College. And again, just as a parenthesis or an aside, this might be an historical anecdote you find of some interest and even some value. Alabama Christian School of Religion moved off campus a few miles up the road and to another church building, to Landmark Church of Christ, their old church building. That was the name of the congregation in Montgomery, Alabama at the time. And there they owned a quarter of the property, 25% of the property, and the church owned 75% of the property. That worked well for a number of years, but eventually Alabama Christian School of Religion went out and bought its own private property and established a campus there, built its own buildings, and established a campus. It changed its name after that to Southern Christian University, and then later to Regions University. But there is a bank in the United States by that name of Regions Bank, and they challenged in court the right of the school to call itself Regions University, and they had to give up that name, and eventually they adopted the name Amridge University. Just kind of a brief history of the school from which I was able to graduate in Montgomery, Alabama. But now returning to the question of accreditation. Some of our brethren didn't care if their schools were accredited. They thought they had good programs of study, and they were not going to go to accrediting authorities to seek permission to have programs that would be considered comparable to programs that would be presented in counterpart schools, say, for example, secular schools or denominational schools. That just didn't concern them. But it began to concern some of the students. Here's why. For example, suppose I earned a bachelor's degree from a liberal arts college that's owned by members of the Church of Christ, of the Churches of Christ, and I go out to present my diploma to get a job somewhere, say at a school teaching English, at another school. I want to teach English, and they ask, what are your credentials? Well, I graduated from, let's just say, Freed-Hardeman University, just as an example. Now, Freed-Hardeman is fully accredited, for your information. But let's suppose that it were not, and had no accreditation, no endorsement by an accrediting authority. Then when I go out to get that job, and they look at my background, they may ask, well, what is Freed-Hardeman University? Are they accredited? And if we say no, we didn't care about accreditation, then they might wonder, well then, did you really deserve to receive a degree that's called a bachelor's degree or a master's degree? Do you really have a legitimate master's degree, or is it a bogus degree? Is it just a pretend-like degree? Well, that's a legitimate question. So accreditation came to be seen as important. So if we could meet certain standards that would be considered across the board as necessary, just basic standards, that would allow us to present the curricula in such a way that it would not be vastly different from how that curricula would be taught in another school that is already recognized, then that our program would be considered accredited and it would be given legitimacy. It would be bona fide, or have its bona fides. That's important. Now I'm going to talk about in the next session the danger with accreditation. Again, I'm not that familiar with your situation. Some of you will be. Some of you will know it very well. And you will know about what accreditation we have or may be seeking. And I think in principle it's good to seek accreditation. But, as we shall see, there are also dangers, sometimes hidden dangers. There may be dangers lurking just beneath the surface as we seek to become fully accredited and to move up there and to take our place among all the other academic institutions in our world. Thank you for your kind attention for this session. In the next session, number 3 for this second week, we will look at the dangers of having accreditation.